Hi everyone, I welcome you all to the workshop on the idea of extension. I think a lot of you all were asking me questions about extensions in British parliamentary format. And I think it's very difficult also when you're starting the British parliamentary format for the first time. So today with us is Luigi, joining us all the way from Philippines. So to introduce his credentials, he's a renowned debater on the university circuit with exceptional expertise in British parliamentary debating. You name a major BP tournament, and he has delivered outstanding performance there. He served as the deputy co-adjudicator at WUDC 2024, the largest British parliamentary tournament in the world, and was also grand finalist in the same tournament in 2021. Beyond his debating achievements, Luigi is an extremely energetic and engaging coach, widely loved by school students, and I'm confident that you will all enjoy him today, as much as all of us do. So most importantly, make sure that you're learning from the best and you ask him questions and utilize this opportunity. Over to you, Luigi.
All right, nice. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hope everyone's having a wonderful day today. My name is Luigi. Yeah, no, I'll get right into it now. I just wanted to start by introducing the title of today's presentation. I hope you're all doing well. When I was starting debating, extensions was very intimidating. It's very difficult. I understand it's difficult for a lot of you and everyone that starts off debating because in British parliamentary, it's different because you have to come up with a new idea, and it doesn't only have to be new, it has to be relevant. That's difficult. That's difficult. Um, in 2017, uh, I used to play a lot of Fortnite, and then I also played a lot of Modern Warfare. And there's one thing I learned from playing video games for a very long time. I don't know if you guys know that there's like two different things that you can equip onto your gun. It's either a vertical grip or a horizontal grip. And a horizontal grip, it balances out your recoil from left to right. A vertical grip balances out your recoil from up and down. But if you understand this, please, everyone, follow along with me. When you are holding a mouse, you see this mouse? I have a mouse here. It's a Logitech mouse. I like this mouse a lot. Moving left and right is very hard to do when you're shooting a gun because you can't predict where the recoil goes, right? But when you are shooting a gun in a online game, like I don't know, I play Valorant, CS:GO, whatever, all of those games, right? Um, I hope you understand that this kind of a movement of just following it up and down, controlling your recoil by moving it down, is more straightforward, right? It's more straightforward than practicing your recoil left and right because you can't predict it where your gun is gonna move left and right. I like using this analogy a lot because I watched a video earlier today on why you shouldn't equip a vertical grip in online video games because vertical grip makes no sense because there's no expectation that the gun is gonna be going downwards. The gun is only gonna go upwards whenever there is recoil. Whereas in a horizontal grip, that's necessary because you don't know if it's gonna go left or right because that's random inside the game. And so when I think about making extensions in debate, this is quite important for you to understand. You might have been taught early on at your age the difference between what is called a horizontal extension and a vertical extension. Horizontal extension means you come up with a new idea that is completely not stated before. Like opening up talks about feminism and economy. And then closing gov suddenly brings in, we're going to talk about the environment. That's horizontal. But vertical extensions are when a team brings up an idea that was already talked about before and deepens that idea. That's why it's called vertical, because a vertical idea focuses on the same idea and establishes it and elaborates on a little bit more. In my opinion, in debate, it's not that helpful to always think about extensions as only being horizontal and only being vertical. In debate, there's almost always some component that is relatively new and some component that is relatively shared. And when I think about this analogy of the gun recoil and the up and down and left and right, I want you to understand that when you are given an extension, when you have an extension in mind and you want to bring it up in a debate, almost always you want to maximize the points and ideas that are relatively new to the extent that you are able to prove that they are important, but also maximize the points that are relatively stated before, but you could deepen it a lot more and guarantee a win and make it winning. That's kind of like what happens in debate. It's not always guaranteed that if I come up with a completely new idea, I will always win, right? Because that's a risk. It's a risk. It's like literally coming up with a completely new point that no one else talked about. Like, how will you win with a new point like that if it's not related? But if it's a point that was stated before, that's also a risk. Because if you stated the point before, then if you say the same point again, you're definitely going to lose if it's the same exact point in the same way. But if you explain that same point in a deeper way and it is a little bit more specific, then you are a little bit able to guarantee that you will win because the foundation of that point is known. That's known information. You know what that point is. So it's a matter of whether or not I am able to convince the judge that what they know about that point is insufficient, that they have to know something more, and I am able to provide them that. And that is what I mean by squeezing water out of stone. In extension speeches in particular, you're almost tasked with trying to, deal with a lot of debates. Some of them are thin, some of them are broad, some of them are very, very bad openings, very, very good openings. But no matter what it is, you're almost always dealing with something that is limited. Because you can't say everything, but also you can't literally elaborate on everything, right? And so almost always you're doing a balancing act. Am I able to convince the judge it's new enough and that it's relevant enough? And how do I do that? So this lecture is on making extensions work and make sense. This is the mindset shift I want you to understand. Usually, a lot of young debaters that I encounter have this mindset of, well, all I have to do is fill in the gaps of analysis in a particular argument. I just have to prove that this is like I complete the argument. I have to finalize the argument. I have to fill in the gaps in analysis. In my opinion, that is not a complete way of thinking about being a good extension speaker. Why? Because in the wording itself, filling in the gaps in analysis, what are you doing? You're just, it's like you're adding in like some filling into a very well-made pastry. Now, the well-made pastry, the bread, all of that stuff, usually is quite good already. You don't need a lot of filling. Maybe the filling might be a bit too much. It might be a bit too sweet, right? Like if I put so much like filling into a croissant, that doesn't mean a croissant suddenly becomes Michelin star, right? Whereas like when you have an argument, you don't need to always complete every argument. And so usually the problem with this mindset is if I just complete an argument and fill in the gaps of analysis, it's not enough to always win. Because you're always thinking as if, well, the argument itself was already good. I just gotta fill in something. Whereas my mindset shift to you should be, almost always what you're doing in debate is you're adding irrelevant nuance to the debate by not only filling in a gap in analysis, but adding in complexity and changing the argument, transforming the argument into something that it was not before. It has to be a new idea, something that is completely different because you see the debate differently. I always watch this guy. His name is Sheng Wu Li. He's the grandson of Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, founder of Singapore, whatever. And he was the best speaker of the world back in 2010. 2010 and 2009. One of those years. But I always liked watching his member of government and member of opposition speeches before. And one of those debates back in Worlds in 2009, it was the quarterfinal. He was Team C in Oxford. And then it was like his first year or so going in Worlds. And then he was really just trying to make his name out in the world because he was already very good. But he's still showing the world that he was very brilliant back then. And the motion back then was the motion this house would set up an international court to prosecute crimes against democracy. It's quite similar to my world final In my world final, it was this house would set up an international court to prosecute crimes against health because, of course, I made the world final during COVID and it was online. But this was in Worlds 2009, which was all the way back in Ireland, Cork, Ireland in 2009 in quarterfinal. And he was closing opposition. Sheng Wu was closing opposition. Opening government was Will Jones. He was the best speaker at the time. He was Oxford A, and he would eventually win that tournament. And it's quite difficult to be in closing in a high level geopolitics debate like this. Opening Gov comes up and says, well, it's important to prosecute crimes against democracy because dictatorships are bad. Dictatorships take away the sovereignty of the country and they undermine political will, they undermine freedom, and dictatorships are bad for XYZ reasons. All the reasons why we could prosecute dictatorships by being able to solve the problems of dictatorship by putting them in jail and keeping them in jail and, restoring justice. We want to preserve democracy as much as possible by making sure they follow the rules of democracy, like elections, observers, international observers, abiding by international guidelines, by allowing political parties from both sides of the opposition to be able to participate in the election. And so Opening Gov does this very well. Opening Op, obviously, goes in the debate and does the usual arguments as well. They say that, yeah, you know what? We think that this court will not be successful. It's too expensive. It's too difficult. What other arguments would you do at opposition? Opposition might say, well, maybe the international court is not going to be trusted by the local community because it's going to look like foreign intervention, for example. Right? That's perfectly fine. Someone else is, asking, like some giving some arguments to me in the chat saying that, yeah, you know what? Yeah, another argument could be that the international court, would be biased because it's mostly Western leaning, for example. One example of the motion, by the way, would be take a random dictatorship country around the world, let's say Ivory Coast in Africa. And if they, for example, run an unfair election, like let's say that they do something like election rigging or stuffing the ballot boxes by putting in the name of their own daughter or son to win the election instead of, making it a fair election, then the international court would come in and then prosecute that leader and then put them in jail. Why is it necessary that it has to be an international court? Because an international court is often likely to have more resources than the local court because the local court might likely be biased. Again, I'm just setting up the debate, Opening Gov and Opening Op so far. Quite interesting. And for at this point, Opening Gov is probably winning, and they're doing quite well, to be honest. And they're doing quite good, honestly. They're doing really good. Sheng Wu comes up, and I cannot tell you how amazing it is, how brilliant it is. You can watch this video. It's online. Worlds 2009, quarterfinal. WUDC 2009, quarterfinal. ICC. He comes up, and he says, the problem with opening government is that they set too high of a standard for countries around the world. It is either you are a perfect democracy or you are either a complete dictatorship and a failure. And there's no room for the in-between. And then he goes and says, this policy is only going to force existing transitional countries further into dictatorship and authoritarianism. And it will only preserve the inequality between those that are perfect democracies and everyone else around the world. Because the moment that you sanction a country, you weaken their government, and you disregard any attempt at democracy within the country, that is the moment when weak democracies suddenly lose all support possible and they will fail even more. And so he goes on and says, most countries around the world, they became better democracies only by starting off as an imperfect democracy, and that it is sometimes okay to have imperfect dictatorships early on, so long as they have economic development, they become larger and larger, and they have economic progress so that they could eventually redistribute income and also cater to improvement of jobs and access to welfare for citizens, so that they will eventually turn to economic conditions and loans from the international community and then become a democracy after. because economic progress is the easiest indicator for lowering corruption, for example. And the example they gave was Rwanda in the aftermath of 1990, which is the Rwandan genocide when Paul Kagame came into power afterwards and then stayed there for a very long time. Again, I find this to be brilliant because from a closing perspective, you're just like, well, the debate obviously is just about whether democracy is good or bad, right? Dictatorship is good or bad. But closing up comes up here and says, well, what if dictatorship is good? That's insane, don't you think? And then suddenly wins the debate using that framing. Now, I call that squeezing water from stone because sometimes when you come up with an extension, you have to think about what your extension is doing in the debate. That's a mindset shift. That's not about filling in a gap in analysis. It's about changing everyone's understanding of what the debate is. Now, I know some of you guys watch my my YouTube channel. Quite nice. I know that. But I want you to also understand that one of the things I talked about a lot in my YouTube videos is what I call a true comparative, right? Explaining what the debate is about and what it is not about. So when I talk about today's lecture, I want you to understand that it's one thing to just add more detail on one end, but it's another thing to go and elaborate in detail with purpose. And that is exactly what I'll focus on today. The definition of nuance that I will talk about today, and this entire lecture is all about the word nuance. Nuance only means to add complexity and to add clarity. Okay? Make something clearer rather than confusing. Our working definition of nuance is quite simple. I just want to call it as let's call it the intentional explanation, of specific details, right? Sorry. The intentional explanation of specific details, which is quite important in this context because there are many components to this. The first part is that it is intentional. Intentional with respect to what? Intentional with respect to your goal. What is your goal? In closing, your goal is to have a winning extension. And for me, that definition always is to explain the sorry, let me just go and show it here. It is explain the interrelatedness of points in such a way that only your extension makes the most sense. Again, when I talk about the interrelatedness of points, what do I mean? I mean that there is an understanding of the judge, there is an understanding of you, and there is an understanding of your opponent. What your job is in debate is to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Because if they don't understand what the debate is about, then they won't understand where your extension fits in relation to the other points in the debate. Which is exactly what's happening in the one a while ago, right? Opening Gov runs an argument on democracy being good. Opening Op says, well, the court's not going to be trusted. Closing Op comes in and says, well, the debate is not only about whether democracy is good or bad, nor is the debate only about whether the court is going to be successful or not. But for the court to be successful, it must not be overly interventionist such that it undermines democracy or the transition to democracy itself. And so if we can prove at opposition that many of these countries are already in the transition to democracy and that an international court might only harm the process to transition to democracy and it exacerbates distrust against the community, then we don't just prove that democracy sometimes might be good. It is that it necessitates some level of dictatorship. It necessitates some level of economic control over the government because it is the best way to unify the population. That's so interesting. That's insane, don't you think? I think that's insane because you're essentially making the claim that a lot of democracies around the world required some level of control over its people or some level of national identity that was somewhat exclusionary to the creation of that country. I have a very good example, right? Like you think of post-colonial India, right? You know that, countries around the world were colonized by countries that were incredibly abusive and expropriated national natural resources from your own nation, right? And the process of coming up with your identity required some level of, creating an identity that was uniquely about India, uniquely about the Philippines, right? And that involves some level of rejection of foreign interest and foreign control over your country. In the Philippines, it was the rejection of America because we didn't trust the Americans controlling our country because it was like colonialism over again, like colonialism 0.0. But in, any other country, right, that could also manifest in somewhat over controlling ways. And so you would say, yeah, you know what? That's why the International Court is not only bad because it has Western judges, it is particularly bad because the way in which they intervene in the unification process within the state is by directly undermining people's own ability to associate with each other. That's what the debate is about, right? So here, you want to be clear in your goal. It's intentional. It's purposeful. You don't add details for the sake of adding details. But the details have to be specific. What do I mean by that? What they do is that they provide you with structure and some level of understanding of how you can layer an argument so that you have the tools that you can use to explain a debate. Again, pause for a moment. You can answer it in private chat to me if you want. I'll ask you right now, what are the social forces that make it very likely that if you are a religious person, why is it likely you will hold on to those religious beliefs for the rest of your life? Why is it more likely you'll hold on to those religious beliefs to the rest of your life as opposed to abandoning your religion later on? Again, this is purely on probability. It's a purely probabilistic argument. I'm just explaining why is it more likely I will be religious if I am already a religious person now compared to before, right? Am I going to be religious forever or am I going to stop being religious? What are the social forces that make it likely to be the case? This is what I call specificity of details. These are the details, or in debate language, these are the structural reasons that make it likely to be the case that one claim is more true than another. Okay? So I'm seeing people answer to me in the chat. Some people are saying that, it's there's like your exclusion from community if you abandon it, and so you're afraid of other people. They have control over your life. It's also tied with your familial relationships, like your parents. Like you love your parents. That's why you don't want to leave your religion because you might ruin your relationship with your parents. Or maybe it's because you're indoctrinated by religion and that you actually believe in the religion because you've believed in it for such a long time. Or maybe another reason might be, because I want to take a gamble that if God is real or if there is a God, then at least if I believe in God, I might go to heaven. You know what I mean? If I don't, then I'm screwed. But if God isn't real, it's at least it's a little bit better for me to believe in God, right? That's what people might say. Okay, so there are multiple reasons, right? There are multiple reasons that contribute to why religion can be powerful in an individual. These are what I call mechanisms, but also, for your purpose, these are the details, okay? Details. Whenever you think about purpose and details, you're almost always thinking about how could I weaponize those details in a way for me to win the debate. Let's take this example. In this motion, this House's environmentalists would closely work with corporations. Obviously, this motion is compared against what? If you don't work closely with corporations, what most environmentalists do is that they boycott corporations or they challenge corporations or they basically criticize corporations. They say that, you're causing pollution or you're anti-environment, that you're all corrupt, right? And then now the debate is about whether you should work closely with corporations. And so I ask you, what might it mean to work closely? If you were Gov, OG comes up and then says, it's okay, it's good to work with corporations because corporations have a lot of money and they have a lot of influence and they have a lot of innovation. That's what OG might say. OG says, corporations are good because of XYZ reasons. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of influence, and they have a lot of power over society. Opposition comes up and says, no, 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 no. This goes against the beliefs of the environmental movement because corporations are evil. Corporations are evil because they are profit oriented, they are corrupt, and that they are very, 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 very greedy. They want to pollute the environment. They don't care about regulations. They don't follow regulations. So OG and OO have a deadlock. They have a deadlock, a disagreement on whether or not corporations are evil and whether they are good. So I'm asking you, what does it mean to work closely with a corporation? Now, there are some people that are answering already. Some people have said, corporations, it's important so that I could have the government influence a corporation by coordinating with environmentalists, by having a joint project, which might be called a public-private enterprise, for example, a public-private partnership. Or someone else is saying, well, you could also include consultants, environmentalists that want to end up working in corporations, and they start advising the corporation to try and invest in green technology. They say that, yeah, corporation, by the way, it looks like you're going to earn a lot of money if you invest in green technology right now. So you should do that. And so you give that advice to a corporation. Or it could also look like what is called shareholder activism, where environmentalists who have a lot of money, they start buying up shares in a company that is relatively environmentally damaging, and then they start having a lot of influence in that company because they buy up shares and then they vote in that company and change the entire priorities of that company. One example is when ExxonMobil, which is one of the biggest polluters of oil spills during the 2000s and early 1990s, ExxonMobil, right? ExxonMobil now has a lot of green investors who are invested in what is called the Sustainable Development Goals, green investing. And so those investors are trying to shift ExxonMobil into investing into other kind of resources, like, again, moving away from fossil fuel technology and then trying to invest into green technology instead, which is a big risk, by the way. But according to ExxonMobil and their investors, they said it would be more profitable in the long run if we make this change now, as opposed to us going bankrupt if we lose all our fossil fuel resources in the next 5 years, because that's going to be incredibly expensive to us as a company. And so, guys, pause. The details, working closely, allows us to make an extension. Because OG just said, corporations are good. They likely cooperate. They have a lot of money. Opening up says, no, but you're betraying your beliefs because corporations are evil. But if I'm closing, I will go up and I will say, and listen along with me here, I will say, the problem with the opening half in this debate so far is that they have not talked about what it specifically looks like to work closely with a corporation. This is an important point in this debate, because if I could prove that the more that we influence a corporation, the more we're able to change the incentive structure of that corporation, and the more that we're able to reform that corporation so that it becomes more sustainable in the long run, and so that they also improve access for other corporations that want to enter into the green technology space, and that this is also instrumental for reducing backlash in the long run, then we will win this debate. And then you move on from there. Okay? I hope that makes sense. So that's quite nice. The point being that all of this is just looking at a mechanism, reading it closely, and then going back. I'll give one more example. Like, if the motion was disaster gets the rise of social media as a primary source of news distribution, and then you're like, oh, the debate is about the rise of social media as a source of news distribution. And you're like, what does it look like for social media to become increasingly a dominant news source? And you're like, oh, okay. The process of social media becoming a dominant news source involved the following. A, it involved that it outcompeted mainstream media companies, so that mainstream media companies ended up becoming bankrupt and losing their profits, and they become smaller and smaller, such that journalists ended up losing a lot of their jobs. And those journalists ended up getting hired to work for social media companies instead, wherein they would not focus on working long form journalist articles, but have short form articles instead. So now it's like, oh my, we're a little bit more specific upon what this kind of mechanism looks like. The rise of social media displaced in a disruptive manner other news organizations. So the way it was adopted was very disproportionate. And then that becomes your extension, right? It's the easiest way to make an extension. I promise you. It like wins 90% of debates at the college and high school level. Anyways, going further, right? What I'm gonna do today is look at 5 things. There are 5 slides to this presentation. It's quite simple. It's a very, very, very fast, simple lecture today. I'm gonna look at different ways to develop nuance. 1 is the nuance to recontextualize. 2, nuance to extract mechanisms from your illustrations. 3, nuance to capture or hijack impacts. 4, nuance to unpack orders of weighing. And 5, nuance to clarify extensive analysis. Notice that each and every one of them are parts of debate which I think are quite important. Number 1 is focused on context. Context meaning what is the debate setting? Or what is the problem? What is the environment in which the debate is currently set? Number 2, what happens within an argument? People usually call this the middle analysis, but in general, this is just basically what are the logical links within the argument, and how could I derive those logical links from the pre-existing characterizations or illustrations that are brought up in a debate. Because looking at an illustration, looking at an example, surprisingly gives you a lot of mechanisms just by immersing yourself in the story of the mechanism. Number 3, this is what most people might be familiar with. You look at an impact or argument of the opening half, and then you just hijack it. And I'm going to look at how you can nuance it based on clarifying where does their argument end and where does your argument begin. Number 4, I'm going to look at extents of weighing, which is to look at the principles, the underlying principles of those arguments, and how I could develop an entire principled argumentation based only on the underlying value of the opening half. And then lastly, I'm going to look at extensive analysis, which is to basically look at the structure of an argument and the way it is positioned and framed in a debate. That's all it is. It's only 5 slides, and it's going to be quite simple. And so if you have any questions today, I intend to only take around 7 minutes per slide. And hopefully by the end, I should have enough time for questions. If you have questions on extensions, you can save it and then ask it in the chat. But I realize there are so many of you sending me messages. So if you really want the question to be remembered, my recommendation is just keep it all and then copy paste it later. Okay, later, because there are a lot of messages. I'm very happy that a lot of you guys are participating, which is quite nice. That's quite nice. All right, game. Are we ready? Are we ready? I'm ready. I'm ready. If you're ready, I'm ready. If you're ready, let's do this. So the first motion is this house regards the normalization of individualized entertainment. There's an info slide for this motion. Allow me to just read out the info slide for you guys, so it's a little bit simpler and a little bit more concrete. It's quite simple, no? This one is this house regrets the normalization of individualized entertainment. And the info slide is as follows. The normalization of individualized entertainment refers to the widespread cultural shift in which consuming entertainment became primarily a private personal activity rather than a shared collective one. This included the rise of portable and personal devices like the Sony Walkman, the Game Boy, the iPod, and smartphones. The expectation that individuals carry their own sources of music, games, and media, and the embedding of these practices into everyday life such that private entertainment became the social norm across generations and societies. Okay? So it's quite simple. It's just you guys being addicted to Netflix or Disney Plus or whatever, and it's individualized. It's algorithm-based, and it's also personalized to you. And, we have our own smartphones. It's contrasted against, I don't know. You guys still have your homes, right? And I still remember a time when I was much younger when I didn't own a smartphone. I never owned a personal phone, and the only thing I would rely on is I would just wait for the 7 p.m. news with my family, and we'd watch it on TV together. And oftentimes we'd rely on collective forms of the collection and distribution of news, and media and entertainment. We'd watch the movies together, we'd watch concerts together, all those things. And to a significant degree, that's not much less today than it was before. Okay? So OG goes up and says individualized entertainment exacerbates political polarization within echo chambers. Opening opposition goes up and says people have more choice within individualized media and it is enjoyable. Notice, guys, that there are two different clashes in this opening half. One side is talking about some political division. I don't know why political divisions are important. It's not necessarily clear, but you can explain it, right? The more and more you get immersed in a particular media source, the more and more that you're likely to be influenced by that media source. And the more it's individualized, the more you feel that I interact with this one voice and I have no counter check and balance against my beliefs right now. Which is why if I continue to watch, like, let's say, what is it? Coco Melon or Jordan Peterson or whatever, the more and more I get influenced by that media, the more and more I get sucked into that content, and the more and more I reverberate and mimic that content, and the more I believe in that content because there is no other community I interact with outside of this individual media. It's like a cult of personality, right? OG says this is bad because it is political polarization. OO comes up and says, no, this is a debate about entertainment. It's about, I like watching Netflix and I like watching John Wick 1, 2, and 3. I like watching Avatar, The Last Airbender, not the James Cameron movie. And then OO says that it's enjoyable. It's enjoyable. I have choice. Algorithms are good. OG says, no, algorithms collect a lot of your data and they divide you politically a lot more. OO says, well, that's not too big of an issue because at least you're happy and that's okay. Now, as a judge, guys, I'll admit this is quite difficult to engage with, huh? It's so difficult to go and elaborate whether or not you're actually winning this engagement or not. But the point is, OG and OO have their own clashes. It's a messy debate. At Closing Government, what you can do is quite simple. I would go in and I would say as follows. I'll read it out and I'm going to explain what this means, okay? Individualized entertainment crowds out our ability to generate empathy for different communities and their perspectives. This is mediated by close relationships. It is mediated by a different community of different viewers from different backgrounds. And this claim is important in this debate to explain why individualized entertainment is particularly isolating and why individuals actually end up losing more freedom and losing more choice when they are cut off from their relationships. The problem with opening opposition in this debate is that they assume people are happy because that is what the algorithm says, and that the media says that they're happy because they're recommended that all the time. But because people don't have control over the algorithm, and that they are more than likely to be isolated in the process of immersing in this content, then that is how they particularly end up in a very negative cycle of reinforcement where they end up harming their relationships with other people. They internalize beliefs that are incredibly terrible, misogynistic, discriminatory, whatever. And they believe that it is entertaining because they only seek for friendships and sources of comfort within these communities instead. And so that is how the happiness of opening opposition is actually working against them. It worsens political polarization in this specific way. OG only goes as far to say that there is a division because entertainment is likely to be polarizing and there's an echo chamber. But they don't explain, listen to me, they don't explain what is the process by which people relate to other people right now. My claim is, the context is, most people are naturally empathetic and willing to listen to other people. When I'm born in the world, I care about what my parents think. I care about what my friends feel. And I am willing to interact with their perspectives because I have relationships with them. I grow up and I get a job and I'm willing to interact with my coworkers because we have a shared working environment and I understand them and I want to empathize with their struggles. There's a set level of default empathy that we have for each other. That is the context in which this debate is set up. That is why I call it recontextualization. I am clarifying what is the real characterization and context in which this debate takes place. And then I go in, boom, argument. The argument I'm going to bring in is to resolve the opening deadlock. OG just talks about political polarization, but they don't compare against entertainment and freedom. OO just talks about freedom and happiness, but they don't compare this against the mechanisms by which it happens through individualized entertainment. So if I could prove that we necessarily use happiness in a skewed way to try and create this less freedom for individuals, and we lose our freedom, we lose our optionality more and more, the more and more we're baked into this media, then we will win this debate because our counterfactual, again guys, our counterfactual is a world without individualized entertainment would have otherwise gravitated to what? Again, the recontextualization that people already have default empathy and they likely already default to each other and listen to each other because they have close relationships. They have communities of different viewers with different backgrounds. And this is the means by which they interact with each other. Guys, notice this stuff on the brackets. That's the details. Those are the details, the specific details. Everything else here is just the way in which I position it related to the other points in the debate. So that's what I mean when I say I weaponize a point in favor of resolving an opening deadlock issue. Recontextualization works a lot because there's a presumption in the debate. There are assumptions that are flawed in the opening half. Like, if I remember the example earlier, if you remember this example, right? Crimes against democracy. The assumption of OG and OO is that, oh, it's just about whether democracy is good or bad. Or the assumption is that, well, maybe all governments that are dictatorships are bad. But closing up comes up and says, no, guys, this debate is not about perfect dictatorships versus perfect democracies. This debate is about countries that are in the middle, in the transition. And so we want to talk about these countries the most because that is where this debate most likely takes place. That is the context of the debate. Okay? That's example one. Are we on good time? Let's just check. 10:16. That took me 9 minutes. All right, we're good. 2 minutes ahead, so I still have enough time. The next example is you want to nuance to extract mechanisms from your illustration. What do I mean? I don't know with you guys, but I like imagining stories, and I like thinking about stories a lot. When I think about religion, and like I think about some examples of religion, like I think about, well, what does it look like to be in a ritual? You know, a ritual, for example. Like when we talk about the argument in organized religion, like, oh, organized religion is oppressive because it has an authority structure, it has peer pressure, and it also is weaponized by communities to create conservative beliefs. That's like one way to make an argument, right? I explain authority, peer pressure, and social communities that are conservative, right? But it's not only that, right? There are other ways you interact with organized religion. Organized religion also involves me participating in a ritual. And I ask you, what does ritual mean? Well, ritual is a practice. I do it over and over again. And I do it with other people. And we have a belief behind it. When I go to a church and I sing songs, I donate money to a charity together with other people that are there. I see the same people over and over again. And I cry with them. I pray with them. I kneel down with them collectively. I think about that illustration and I think, what is the meaning behind this? What is the underlying mechanism behind this? Right? So when I say extract mechanisms from an illustration, you start with the example because a lot of examples are given in emotion a lot of the time. And then you go and work backwards. you start thinking, well, what happens in this debate, right? Like, how is it related to the debate? What is going on? So, if the motion was just for a world where individuals' primary collective identity is based on livelihood, I'll actually give you guys the info slide. It's actually a very nice info slide. This is from my Asian final in 2024. This was like when we made the Asian final for the second time. Actually no, it was the third time during this one. Well, it was quite nice. We also still lost this one, to be fair. I mean, I lost this one, and it's perfectly fine. There's no problem at all. But we were closing government, and I really love this motion. It's really nice. But I want to read to you guys the info slide. The info slide was as follows. They said it's about an indigenous community. The Vezo people are a semi-nomadic ethnic group living along the southwestern coast of Madagascar, known for their deep connection to the sea. Their collective identity is primarily shaped by their trade and their livelihood, such as being exceptional swimmers or skilled fishermen. In contrast, in the status quo, collective identity is often formed based on a mixture of inherent social traits such as race, gender, or nationality. I like that example a lot because it's about, like, I mean, the example is about trade and livelihood and fishermen and swimmers, right? Like, if you look at this motion, will your immediate intuition be it's about like I don't know, a gardener? Is it really about a gardener? Is it really about like I don't know, a person that works in the electricity pole? Is it really like that? Is it really like about an example of like let's say an a plumber, right? Like if you're Mario and Luigi or whatever, right? Maybe not. Maybe that's not the immediate example that might come into mind. Because it's a prefers a world debate, right? So you're explaining what the world would look like, right? It's like a world from the beginning, right? If people associated with this identity, right? What is the alternative? If you guys were to message in the chat right now, right? What is the alternative? What is the alternative outside of this? Outside of livelihood as a primary collective identity? What other collective identities do people default to outside of livelihood? Like, what would you say? It's only one word. One word, honesty. There are many other collective identities. But go. Give me an example of a collective identity that people might associate themselves with outside of their job or livelihood. I don't want to use the word job too much because livelihood has a different connotation, right? Because livelihood is like it's like livelihood is it's like my life, right? It's like the livelihood of this community. It's like we're associated with our community because of our labor and what we do for our livelihood, right? So some people are giving me some answers. Like there's a culture. Someone said religion. That's good. That's good. What else? What else? What else? Who else have other answers? Um, Nationality. That's good. That's good. Nationalism. Perfect. That's good. That's a perfect example, right? Um, that's actually quite critical to this debate because on one hand, Gov is going to say this is a world where livelihood is the primary collective identity. And then Op is going to say that, well, no, it's not about that identity only. There are other identities. And so at least we have choice, right? This is exactly what happens in the debate. If you even watch the Asian final that I participated in, you can search it up, ABP 2024 finals. And then you could just watch my speech as well. I was closing Gov. And you can also watch opening opposition. That was quite a good debate as well. This is what happened in the debate. OG goes up and says, individuals are able to find more contentment and happiness when they feel they're contributing to their community, as opposed to the current world where they're dreaded by the toxic competition of 9 to 5 jobs. Opening Op comes up and says, well, when individuals are free to associate with other collective identities, they are able to collectively supersede capitalist struggles to promote social change. Those are both very, very good arguments, by the way. OG implies that there is toxic competition in a 9 to 5 job, right? And they also imply that we could get happiness, and happiness is important because we contribute to the community. And that's what happens when you have a primary collective identity based on livelihood. And then OO presumes that we currently have capitalist struggles based on our job, and we're forced to have a job no matter what. And that escaping away from our job requires that we need to be able to associate with other identities outside of our job. What's a very good example? a lot of discrimination in the workplace is based on characteristics of identity, right? Like gender-based discrimination in workplace, right? Like that is based on your gender, right? Or it might be based on your race, for example. Education-based discrimination, like people entering into American universities, for example, which is a very important Supreme Court case, right? Like that is based on race, right? And it's because you're just like, oh, you don't accept me because of my high SAT score. They're only accepting me because I'm Chinese, for example, right? And so that might cause issues, right? And so, and so, OO says collective identity allows us to escape away from capitalist struggles. We can promote social change because we can collectivize. OG says no, but we can contribute to our community and that's good. Again, multi-layered clashes, multi-layered ways to address the debate. My goal for you guys is think of illustration, think of the Vezo people, which I talked about in the info slide earlier, like the swimmers and fishermen that are shaped by their trade and livelihood with a deep connection to the sea. And think about how history would have formed if people remained that way. Think about it, okay? And then think, what are the underlying mechanisms, right? What are the underlying mechanisms by which this happens? Game, let's go. So when I was closing government, one of the things that I would say would be as follows. The idea that individuals can freely choose their collective identity is an idea that is fundamentally based on privilege. It is an idea that opens up a group to collective exploitation by powerful forces like the nation state or by a larger racial group. It is only with a world based on livelihood. Again, this is the part that I'm going to elaborate on and mechanize its cultural components, its self-sustaining nature, and its specialized capacity, where individuals are better able to take ownership over their own produce and be independent. My question is, what does it really mean to be born into a rural family of coffee farmers in the Philippines? What does it mean to see one's own role and self-identity as such? So I think about that example first. I think like, okay, if I was born into a rural family of coffee farmers in the Philippines, I didn't really have any choice to be a coffee farmer, right? Either world, I would still likely be in a bad socio-economic position where I will still be forced to be a coffee farmer. On opposition, the problem with their world is that when some people are divided in the community, some people leave, they don't support the community, they leave and they go somewhere else, or they pursue a different job, or they completely destabilize these livelihoods because of internal divisions that are created by a capitalist narrative that says you can succeed, you might succeed, you should beat other people. This, by the way, follow along with me, I am weaponizing the toxic competition, but not in a 9 to 5 job way. I'm weaponizing it based on my illustration. I say that because people are so preoccupied with this obsessive pursuit for money that is driven by capitalism and consumerism, because people have no other option but to keep on doing this or work for someone else for trade or for resource exploitation because another company bought up their land and they want to expand their land because other people wanted to get more jobs in that area at the expense of your livelihood. You lost your connection with the meaning that you wanted to create with that community and the option for you to opt into that job and therefore work, be fulfilled in that job is something that you are separated from. Or the word in Marxism is you are alienated from it, right? And so, if you're a gov, what I would say is the problem with opposition is that only the most privileged are the ones that benefit from having multiple different collective identities. It is only livelihood that is the most democratizing collective identity that makes it easier for even poor individuals to be able to find their own role and self-identity in their community. Because inequality, the same conditions that made someone poor in the very first place or demanded that they get a separate job and multiple jobs so that they could get by day to day, those conditions were created by the same narrative that said that the nation state should be protected, your race is more important than other people, your community is more important than other people, and that your collective identity, because you chose into it, is more valuable because of that choice. But if I'm Gov, I would say, because we don't have those other collective identities, we default to livelihood. Livelihood allows to associate in empathy with people who are also working our own jobs and have their own role that is quite critical and vital to the community. Everyone is important in some significant way. And people indoctrinate themselves into believing that, and that in itself resolves the very underpinnings of inequality that opposition might talk about. So that's what I would say. That's quite interesting. It's just one way for you to understand that OG has some material that is very valuable. I admit they run the contentment and happiness point, but they don't explain how that happens. OO talks about freedom of choice, but I will talk about how freedom is eliminated in the process of this creating further inequality and exploitation among different individuals that want to exploit each other. Okay? The point is, guys, whenever you build an illustration, you always come up with some mechanism underneath it. So, for example, here, when I think about the Vezo people, I think about culture, I think about self-sustenance, I think about specialization. I work the same thing over and over again. I get very, very good at it. I sustain my own community because I develop a contributory relationship with people in my own community because they are reliant on me. I am reliant on them. We have a mutual reciprocal relationship. And also that there is culture, that there is importance that is endowed onto it, that is beyond our community. And therefore, this value is something that is deeper and easier to associate with because it is something that I know my effort. I had control over that effort, and that was something I could measure on my own. As opposed to, for example, under a capitalist system or whatever, I feel separated more and more from whatever my product was. Therefore, my motivation declines over and over again. Okay? I hope it makes sense. We're still on good time. 16, 16, 30, 14. This took 8 minutes. This one is nuanced to capture hijack impacts. This example motion is quite simple. I like this one a lot as well, no? What do I mean by hijack? Hijack is just basically like you take the impact, but you find a way to co-opt the impact, right? So you share the impact, but you find another way to manifest the impact and the argument in your speech. So for example, here, in the motion, this will support states pursuing this goal of self-sufficiency in energy. OG can run the argument, this is a more sustainable solution in a volatile climate where the US is unreliable because of trade wars, oil prices, which fluctuate, and fossil fuel reserves, which are in the decline. So these are, by the way, the mechanisms of OG. OG says the US is unreliable, oil prices fluctuate, and fossil fuel reserves are in the decline. And they say this is a volatile climate, and this is a more sustainable solution if we pursue energy self-sufficiency. Energy self-sufficiency just means that we produce our own energy and we don't import energy from somewhere else. Okay? And the argument of OG is that this is going to save us more money in the long run. OO comes up and says energy self-sufficiency will be extremely expensive and this will likely destabilize most governments in the short run. Again, guys, I'm not even saying that these are bad or good arguments. I'm just saying that these are actually very realistic arguments that might come up in a debate, right? Like, I think you guys have encountered similar arguments before in your speeches. The question now is, before we come up with our extension, what do I need to do? How do I win this debate? What do I need to do? What are my priorities? One of my priorities intuitively in this debate might be, well, I need to address this expensive thing of OO. And I also have to address this long run versus short run issue in the debate. Because they don't feel like they're engaging, right? They're not engaging that much. But they are attempting to engage, right? And so we want to find a way to directly establish that connection. What I could say at CG is quite simple. I would say most governments around the world have been coerced and forced into an unfair system of international trade where their ability to manage their own state enterprises, again, by the way, this is the comparative in our side, which is functionally necessary for them to be able to generate local revenues, to sustain public welfare programs, and their own national energy program. Again, this part is just like a bracket, right? This is just a bracket so that you guys understand the context in which the debate is set up, right? So when I talk about this one, this is just like the bracket comparative, right? And then I'm saying this system, right, is undermined by their own lack of leverage in international negotiations. So I want to try and prove that this is important. That leverage in international negotiations is a very important value. Why? Because OO is making an argument on destabilization, meaning that these governments get screwed over. And OG is talking about how they are sustainable because they save money. So I need something that creates stability in the long run and also explains that we're able to resolve the existing disagreements and backlash against this country. My answer would be the leverage of international negotiation. And so what I would try and do in this speech is I'm going to say what we will do at closing government. What we will do at closing government is quite simple. What we're going to do is not only demonstrate how the current path that we are on is designed to make us bankrupt in the service of these foreign companies when energy crises do arrive, but also to show how multiple countries doing this will significantly reform the behavior of these multinational energy companies in the service of green technology access for all. And so I guess the point of this claim is that you just want to, be very specific, right? You just want to be very specific in explaining that, our comparative is multiple countries participate. This is what allows us to be able to resolve the underlying problems of resource deficiencies, problems on not accessing all the money that we otherwise would have, and the ability for us to be able to have more money so that we could eventually negotiate with the largest multinational companies that are already very monopolistic and exploit our resources right now and undermine regulatory institutions in our own government. So my claim is, I start off the argument, right, at closing gov by saying, I want your impact. Your impact is sustainability. And we save a lot of money. I cannot avoid that. I can't avoid that being a conclusion in the debate because, of course, everyone's going to prove that to be very important. But the only important thing that I might try and prioritize in the debate is to try and explain no that this is going to be cheaper than what opening opposition might anticipate it to be, and that our side actually makes it easier for other countries to buy in. Why? Because multiple countries do it, and that they do so in a way where they create regional agreements that are likely to hold these institutions to account so that it becomes harder and harder for them to continue to abuse developing nations in this specific kind of context. I think this is quite important. Because if you think about all of these issues, right, that might be very, very big in the debate, right? OO could eventually make this an entire argument about why international trade becomes cheaper and cheaper over time. Maybe trade wars might even get worse if you try and promote self-sufficiency. Companies might collapse in a more immediate manner. Bankruptcy might be more imminent. Governments might have to bail them out in the long run. If I'm closing gov and I want to say that people are already held hostage by multinational corporations, they're already forced to bail them out already right now, and they lose leverage already by playing the waiting game with these countries, then the only self-defense these countries can ever have is by doing it together. Okay? That's quite nice. I like that a lot. I hope you guys are understanding the way that we're building these extensions. I do understand that it is difficult, but it's part of the game, right? You have to think, what am I doing with this introduction? What's the priority? What's my entry point? Here, the obvious entry point is that OG and OO are just focused too much on whether it's expensive or not, or whether it's a long run or the short run. But they don't talk about how we require XYZ in order to even reach the long run. And so that's how we will prove and fill in the gap of opening gov by advancing this particular extension. Okay? Game. Let's do this one. This is principled extensions. You guys might have difficulty running principled arguments. I think that's just an issue of not being willing to take risks and understanding what underlying values are. As long as you look for an underlying value, the value should be able to be clear to you, and then you're able to associate and think, well, why is this valuable? What's the underlying reason why this might be valuable? What obligation is put in place? What relationship did I consent into? And then you think, okay, if these are important, why are they important? How are they important? How are they actualized in the actual argument? So here, in this motion, this House believes that priests should be legally required to report serious crimes disclosed to them during confession. This only applies to Christianity or Roman Catholicism, where there's like the sacrament of reconciliation, wherein people give their crimes and they report it to a priest, and then they say, Father, I sinned. My last confession was XYZ. These are my sins. I did XYZ. Please forgive me for my sins. And then the priest says, go and pray like a few prayers, and then you're okay. And then walk the path of Jesus or something. And then this debate could be quite simple, no? OG goes and says, criminal justice is more important than religious freedom because victims are more important. This policy will help us solve more crimes. If you look at this, right, it's quite intuitive that this particular claim is contingent on this value being more important than this because of victims. Victims. It's not about the consequential harms. It's about victims. Victims. Right? That's quite important for you to remember, okay? Because OG is not saying we want to reduce all crime. That's the only reason why. It's because victims are more important. That is their underlying reason. It's like the intuition of retribution. We have to take advantage of people that exploited us, and we need to take revenge against them. And the way to balance it out is by having victims of wishes be respected. And then they say the pragmatic argument, which is that policy will help us solve more crimes. I can help ask you guys for an input on this one. If opening opposition goes and runs this argument, religion should not be undermined for the state's purposes. Criminals went to confession to seek forgiveness and pursue redemption. So this policy will only create more distrust and drive them to commit more crime. OO is responding to, follow along with me, guys. OO, with this claim, committing more crime, is responding to this claim on solving more crimes, right? And this claim on religion should not be undermined for the state's purposes is responding to this principle, right? So there are two different parts that are responding to do different parts. And OO, the only reason they explain that the state's purposes should not be respected is because of this, right? That we believe that religion is important because these people are victims as well. They are victims as well. They are also seeking forgiveness. They're also good people, and they want to pursue redemption. And so, you know what, guys? If you do this, you're screwing them over more. That's so unfair. Like they believe that this is their only chance to go to God. And then now, you're even disallowing them to do that one thing that makes them feel that they're respected, that they're worthy of human dignity. That's OO. That's OO, okay? If you're closing government, what are you gonna do? I'll look for some answers. If you guys want to put it in the chat, that would be quite nice. I'd encourage you guys to put some answers. That would be really good. If you have an answer, then put it in the chat. I'm just gonna start reading some of your questions and some of your answers already. Okay. Okay. When I say extract mechanisms, I only mean that you break down an illustration into the generalizable mechanisms that you can get from that illustration. That's what I'm saying. That's what I mean. Someone was asking a question about that. All right. Do we have someone that is answering the question? Um, all right, we have someone. Someone is saying, we can talk about serious crimes, maybe. That's quite interesting. Serious crimes. Yeah, I like that a lot. Because it talks about the proportionality. I like that. I like that. Someone's answering about that. I like that. I like that. Um, what else are other people saying? Those who are scared to confess in front of people will be more comfortable to do so in front of God who they trust. That's interesting. Just no need for a priest. That's a very interesting claim. Okay. One last person. One last person. One last person. One more person is saying, uh, if confessions start to be reported, then their trust in the priest will be sacrificed, and they will therefore stop confessing to them. This policy will only work in the short run, while having trust in priests give them the opportunity to seek redemption. Um, to be fair, that's an op argument. That's not a gov argument. That's an op argument. So I'm looking for a gov argument. I would say that religion drives someone to commit crimes in the first place. Oh, that's an interesting one. Whoever answered that one, that person, good job. That's a funny answer. I like that. That's a very interesting one. I'll go to my answer now because it's quite similar to what some of you guys answered. No, what I would say is this. Sorry, let me put on my game face. This debate so far has discussed whether the state or religion is more important when it comes to addressing criminal offenses. But both opening teams have failed to demonstrate whether a priest is specifically deserving of this kind of protection or not. Because we believe crimes are serious offenses against the community and not just one victim, we will argue that the priest has a reparative obligation to report this crime because they are necessarily complicit in facilitating the evasion of said individual from an investigation, which undermines the ability of the state to allow the public to determine the liability of this individual. Guys, follow along with me. This part is the most brilliant part, right? Because the only reason why op is valuable is when they say that you want to solve crime and the government shouldn't overstep their boundaries. And Gov says, well, criminal justice is important because of victims. But here, my reason is different. My different reason is, no, it's because the public deserves a say. They deserve participation in this system because they were denied the ability to be able to have recourse against this criminal because of the action of the priest. And that's why this is how we best fulfill OG's explanation on the importance of victims, while also addressing OO's claim that these criminals are part of the community and are victims themselves too. In both of these cases, we acknowledge that these people can be victims, but the priest has no right being the one to hold this privileged information. And this is the other part that I think is quite important in this example. Follow along with me. It's that they have no right to facilitate the presupposed healing for this criminal. So whoever answered that question earlier about the one about the religion drives someone to commit crimes, my claim is the more and more they feel that they're morally cleansed of their sins, the more they feel that they're emboldened by their religion, that their God understands them. And there is no place whatsoever where religion can take that precedence in this specific context, wherein you affirm someone's morality when it comes into direct conflict with other people's rights. Now that I think is brilliant. It's a better way to try and order the weighing, the underlying reasons why things are important. OG just says, well, victims are important because victims are important and victims are important and victims are important. At Closing Gov, we're going to explain why the public as victims are important. It is because they were denied the due process to be able to seek out investigation and reparation for the crime and damages committed against them, because this is a crime that is particularly emboldened by the protection that comes from religion. and the particular salvation and mentality that comes from the moral salvation and healing that comes from confession. This is why it is particularly immoral in this circumstance. I love that. That's insane. Don't you think that's insane? I think that's insane. I love that a lot. That's a very good one. Guys, we're down to our last example for the day. Okay? My last example for today is quite simple. This example is the nuance, to clarity, or to clarify extents of analysis. Well, what do I mean by extents of analysis? Arguments don't apply all the time. They only apply under particular conditions or circumstances, right? And so you have to tell the judge, Judge, by the way, you can only believe this argument to be true to the extent of XYZ. So that's only a purely structural way of reorganizing your extension, right? You nuance, add specific details as you clarify what is going on. So again, this example is quite simple. This house opposes the expectation that a person must grow up. The stigma of childishness, outgrowing childhood friendships and relationships, moving on from childhood interests. These are examples, by the way, that come alongside mechanisms. No, these are illustrations, by the way. Illustrations like me playing Fortnite, or me being friends with my high school friends, or me wanting to get into comics and buying all these toys in the background of my screen, if you guys see, because I like buying toys because I'm a child. Anyways, and so the debate is about the expectation that a person must grow up and the pressure that is imposed onto individuals. OG goes up and says this pressure is imposed in a very toxic way by malicious actors. Okay, and it harms the transition to adulthood for most young adults. This adds to more burnout. If you cannot access your safe spaces, like, your friendships that will allow you to de-stress from the harmful, toxic adult environment. OO comes up and says, people default to childish habits because it is difficult to let go. And so it is only with this pressure where we, as individuals, are going to be in a more mature position to determine their adult life, because they will have to grow up at some point anyways. So it's better to grow up earlier rather than later. So OO talks about growing up is inevitable. OG talks about burnout and toxicity. And they talk about the transition. They also agree that the transition is important. Okay? So now I need to make an extension that is specifically about, well, what does this expectation particularly crowd out or undermine? And also, how does this burnout specifically manifest under what conditions? Right? Because I don't want to just say burnout in general, but there's a particular reason why the burnout is particularly bad, right? So I would go in and say, OG's analysis on burnout only works to the extent that this kind of burnout is uniquely different from any other kind of burnout or pressure that someone faces in adulthood. OO's argument only works to the extent that most young adults are incapable of developing a healthy relationship with their childhood associations into adulthood. And so, according to OO, they have to always let go of their childhood at some point. What we will do at Closing Government is demonstrate that the main reason for why young adults gravitate towards their childhood interests is to heal their inner child that was suppressed when a lot of them were forced to study and work for most of their childhood lives. So the reason why this is important, and the reason why our extent is important, is because it's not just about burnout in general. It's that this burnout is not just any burnout. It is a deep betrayal of oneself. And being able to reconstitute one's childhood identity into adult life is quite critical to growing up in the first place. Again, this is important to address what? Again, because OO talks about growing up, and because OG also talks about the transition. So I'm co-opting the values that they have using the mechanism that I am using that is relatively more unique, which is inner child suppression. Okay? And so I end my introduction by saying this is how we're going to win the debate, by explaining these connections. So what do I have to prioritize? If I'm building this extension, I have to prioritize, how is this deep betrayal very bad? How is this identity important? Like, what does it mean to have a reconstitution of a childhood identity? Like, what does it mean to complete one's identity? How do you do that when you're, being childish, growing up with this kind of childhood interest? Like for example, I would say, when I feel that there's ownership over my work, I enjoy my work more. And when I have my own salary, now I can buy my own toys and my own comics, and I could enjoy that because I don't have to ask for permission from my mom to say that, Mom, can you get me this toy? And then I feel indebted to them, and it's very toxic, right? Because my mom's gonna say, well, only if you get A in math next semester. And I'm like, no, I want to work for it, you know? And so that's why I know what I want to build and what I want to focus on. Okay? Done. I'm done. I'm done. This lecture, again, guys, only is just for you to understand that sorry, let me just go and um clean up the screen. This lecture is only for you to remember that there are multiple ways in which you could enter a debate, right? Multiple ways you could enter a debate. But what you will emphasize requires you to understand what are the existent opportunities that are being given to me based on the motion, based on what people said, and how they phrased it, how they structured it, how they weighed it, how they mechanized it, how they illustrated it, how they compared it to the status quo. Okay? So all the time, when you think about your extension, you're almost always trying to relate it as much as possible to what people said and how you enter the debate given that. All right? I'm done. I'm done for today. If you have any questions, now's the time. You can go and ask questions. I'll answer this for people that are still here. But thank you very much for participating and listening. And that's really, really good. Really, really good. It means a lot. Go ahead. Anyone? No, if you have a question, then can you message it to me? Message it to me. So no, I can't call you out verbally because child protection. So just send it to me and I'll answer it. So someone's asking a question. Can you give us tips about crafting good extensions? This is the tip. That's my tip. My tip is the presentation. Very good. I love it. That's my tip. Another one. Um, Will you post this video on your channel? No, because I don't own this video. It's gonna be owned by Indian Debate League. Um, Best way to win a debate like a star, it's to watch a lot of debate videos, copy what they say, and then suddenly you'll find your own voice and you're gonna enjoy it a lot and you're gonna have a lot of fun. And then when you have a lot of fun, that's when you're gonna be really good. Once you have a lot of fun, that's when you're gonna enjoy the process, and that's when you're gonna be more grateful about how much you've improved over a long period of time, rather than crying about all this stuff. Could you re-explain which companies are being bailed out and why in the status quo in one of your examples? Well, it's because if you're a multinational company, right, and there are many developing countries that are indebted to you, the reason why you are technically forced to bail them out if those countries end up failing is because if oil prices fluctuate, these countries don't have any other option but to continue buying from these companies, right? Like it's basically like the example of how do European countries bail out Russia even if Russia is going through sanctions right now? Well, it's because they need oil, right? They need oil. And like the more they buy from Russia, they're helping Russia survive through the economic sanctions that they're being experienced under right now. All right. Anyone else? Anyone else? Blah 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 blah. I'm just trying to look for people. If we don't have questions, can we leave? Yes, you can leave. Thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed the lecture. I hope you had fun. Can you tell us how do you break the topic up and debate on it like in the court of democracy one? For that one, honestly, like I think it's just asking every assumption, right? Like that one is what's a democracy? Is it really about perfect democracies? Right? Once you ask that question, it becomes easier for you to unpack other assumptions. So once you break the words up, you break the assumptions up, and then you come up with your claims that you want to focus on. Yeah. Essentially, it is beneficial to be closing benches because then you can analyze the opening's case, right? Yeah, yeah. That's one way to answer it. Yeah. What are ways to make an impactful extension? This. presentation. That should be fine. Do I have to sound this professional in crafting my extension? Hopefully, yeah. If you don't sound professional, then people won't listen to you. More analysis and ideas or use actual facts. I think it's important to get a feel about the world, and feel of what arguments are being brought in the debate, and then you could keep on practicing it. It doesn't always have to be absurd, right? But I'll give an example of an absurd example, right? One of the videos I made before was on the motion of this House would lift economic sanctions to the Taliban in Afghanistan. And one argument of the debate was, OG says the Taliban are bad. We want to reduce collateral damage. OO says, no, but the Taliban are bad. If you increase economic sanctions, that's a good thing because you want to destabilize the Taliban. But then OG says, no, but the more we sanction the Taliban, the more we harm innocent civilians. And then OO says, no, but the Taliban are bad. I'm closing Gov. I go up and I say, the process of lifting economic sanctions is likely to moderate the Taliban and encourage them to demilitarize because they become less reliant on more violent means of fighting against their own people because they are less economically desperate. This mechanism is more important than opening Gov and opening up because opening Gov talks about collateral damage, but they don't talk about the long term. Opening up talks about how this is going to harm like the Taliban, but we talked about how fighting the Taliban more might cause more harm, and that's how we solve it through our mechanisms, and then you move on from there. Someone asked the question, how can you preempt this from opening? You could preempt this from opening by just incorporating the clashes and questions that you're thinking about, and then going in the debate and saying, this is going to be a debate, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to do this. And the reason why this is important is because it preempts opposition if they were to say blah, blah, blah. That's it. You can't do more. You can't preempt everything. You can only preempt the things that you think are most important. Can your extension be based entirely on a contradictory claim? Does it have to align with opening case? Guys, there are some people that are telling me that some of the extensions that I made tonight are contradictory. My answer to that is no, they are not, because they are phrased as even ifs, or they are massaging and changing an assumption that is made in a debate that is not proven necessarily. Like, for example, if OG makes a claim, all democracies are perfect. And then at closing Gov, I say, well, not all democracies are perfect. Does it mean I'm contradicting opening? No. It just means I'm telling the world more realistically, right? So stating facts realistically is not a contradiction, okay? I hope you guys understand that. So that's quite nice. That's quite good. That's a very, very good question. Is it more beneficial to stay safe in the debate or go controversial knowing that the points you will speak about are against the views of the bench or the judges? I don't care about what judges think. Because guys, you'll never know what a judge believes. I'll be honest, like, people in the world are different. Your judge could be racist. Your judge could be the Jesus Christ incarnate, right? Does it matter? Will that change how you debate? Probably not. Okay? So my opinion is debate well, think well. Don't debate based on what the judges think or what the judges think or say. How many arguments should we have or say to win? One, at least one. How can we win with opening bench? That's not today's lecture. That's for another lecture. Do I have a channel? Yes, Luigi Alcañeses, youtube.com. How do you come up with these extensions at a given time? Practice. When you see a motion, what is going on in your mind? I am thinking about the words of the motion and thinking about similar debates that I've seen before, and I practice it on from there. Okay, that's the last question that I'll entertain for today, guys, since it's already time. So thank you very much for attending today's presentation and lecture. I'm done, and you guys can have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. Enjoy, everyone.
Thank you, Luigi, for joining us. All right, everybody. Thank you, everybody, and all the best for tomorrow's qualifier. And see you all sharp at 1 p.m. actually.